A couple of weeks ago, we took a family trip to REI, armed with gift cards and a checklist of all the gear we needed to replace. We were excited to purchase all the things before our Memorial Day camping trip. As we started going through each of the aisles, something felt off. I don't know why, but I expected to walk in and see a section called Austin's Old Stuff, where I could just purchase the things that I once had. In reality, there were a lot of new items that were far different than what we purchased years prior, but they weren't the same, and I got, well, pouty. I hated the sleeping bags, hated the prices, hated the store associates. None of these things were off for the general public. Sleeping bags were fine. REI has high cost, but quality products. And the store associates, I'm sure, were perfectly nice. But to Pouty Austin, they sucked. The whole store sucked. I missed my stuff, and I couldn't feel anything but annoyed and dismissive. On the ride home, I tried to talk it out with Anna. She had felt this way about a lot of her stuff, but this was the first time it hit home for me. The funny thing is, I went on my first camping trip when I was 31 years old. It was the same trip that our son Xavier, who was 10 months at the time, went on his first camping trip too. All right. But the gear symbolized something deep inside of me. How I choose to raise my children. I want them to have an epic childhood. We climb rocks in the Joshua Tree, jump off waterfalls in Hawaii, explore national parks throughout California, Utah, you name it. My kid is the only fifth grader who's not into video games. Fifth grade boy, I should say, who's not into video games. Very proud of that. I feel like it should go on my tombstone. I have this deep desire to be seen by my kids as some sort of leader in adventure, the one that plans the big trips and guides us through some of the most beautiful places in the world. Somehow, my Yeti cooler and portable grill were a bigger part of that than I initially realized. But that's the thing about stuff, right? It's never just stuff. I don't mourn my old sleeping bag because it was a great sleeping bag. I mourn the time and attention that I spent figuring out the perfect bag at the perfect weight for the perfect temperature. The time I felt vindicated on a cold night in Mount Whitney. I don't miss the grill because of how evenly it cooked the burgers. I miss complaining about how awkward it was. I hoisted it atop my car when packing for a great weekend in Yosemite. Objects are the vessels. The memories are the cargo. Psychologist Bruce Hood, who wrote The Self-Illusion, explains that many of our attachments to physical possessions come from the idea that they're extensions of ourselves. We don't just own things, we imbue them with identity. Losing them, especially in an involuntary way, like through the wildfire, feels like a fracture in the narrative of who we are. The biography of objects is a phrase coined by author Susan Pierce, a major voice in the field of material culture. She says that things acquire meaning not from their inherent value, but from the stories they carry and the lives they witness. Where things have history, they remind us of who we were when, and sometimes who we still want to be. And it's not just academics who notice this. In her memoir, The Year of Magical Thinking, Joan Didion writes about how she couldn't give away her late husband's shoes because what if he came back? There's a logic to grief, and there's logic of stuff. But for those of us who lost it all in the Eaton Fire, I don't think that we ever expected those two things to overlap nearly as much as they have. So I found myself pouting in REI, staring at overpriced kitchen gear. I was trying to reassemble a version of myself that no longer exists. I didn't just lose a cooler and the 3 camping boxes under the deck. I lost the things I built as I was living out my dream to be the fun adventure dad. I lost the stuff that made my ideas turn to reality. The objects that represent the first part of the story, a story that's just beginning. It's a story of our family, one that will undoubtedly be separated by pre and post fire, an Old and New Testament of Adventure Dad, coming this fall to CBS. And that's what today's show is about. Stuff. My guest is therapist Anna Johnson. Yep, that Anna. The one I mention almost every episode. My partner in crime and the person who experiences grief and the loss of physical objects in the exact opposite way that I do. We dive into the psychology of possessions, why we hold them so dear as people, what it's like to have them stolen abruptly, and what our relationship with objects is going to be like in the aftermath of the trauma of the Eaton Fire. I'm Austin LaRoche, and this is Altadena Rebuild, episode 11, Stuff. Anna, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So when I pitched this idea for you, I said, I really want to do something around stuff and our connection to physical objects. And you said, do you want me to look at this through the lens of a therapist? Do you want me to look at this through the lens of an Eaton Fire victim? Do you want me to look at this through the lens of someone who maybe looks at this a little bit different than you, Austin? And I think I just said yes, that D, all of the above. So we're gonna start on the therapist side, and then we'll just see where we go from there. Why do people get so emotionally attached to physical objects just in general?
I think we get attached to various things as we go through life, right? But I think physical objects, as it's represented in this sense, is they hold our memories in so many ways. They're tangible. There's something we can hold. There's something we can see, that we can feel. Our senses hold memories in them in such a way that when we go back to them, it elicits that memory, right? It can be a memory. It can be something that's a sense of self, representation of a sense of self, something of the past, loved ones that may have gone before us, and that's what we have left of them as a coping, as a grief mechanism. There's a lot of purpose that we can have in stuff.
Okay,
but that's just I guess very concise.
Nice. I want to dive into the part on the senses, because that really struck me. I was thinking earlier, you are a long distance runner. You've run marathons, half marathons, all that. And you had a lot of medals that were lost, and many of them you've been able to recoup thanks to some wonderful organizations. And I thought about the time that I ran my own little made up half marathon during COVID. And at the end, our son, I think he was 7 at the time, he gave me this little medal of it was like this little guy on it, and it was like handmade and with whatever beads and stuff he was using. It was very cute, and it was like one of those things that I just had in my office. And so obviously I lost it, and unfortunately I don't think you can recreate that. But I have those. I can see it. I have images with me holding it, and I have such fond memories, even if I don't have it anymore. Where's in that, I guess in that regard, you look at senses and you look at the idea of sight, right? Because I can see that, whether it's in my mind or whether, but I can't feel it. I can't smell it. I don't have that connection. So where do the senses, amplify those feelings? How does that all work?
Well, if you think back, even in that object is something that I do a lot with my clients, is a lot of mindfulness. And mindfulness is being intentional, bringing yourself present, getting whatever is out here away. So if you think about that object, and just imagine that for a second, is what did you see? You saw an image that he created, right? What colors was it in it, if you remember?
Oh yeah, he had green, and it was green. It had a green body, and then there was like a red ribbon because it was Christmas themed, because it was around Christmas.
Okay, so seeing that, it was red, it was green, it was something handmade. When you touched it, what did it feel like?
It was like those little beads that then get ironed down. So it was plasticky, but it was smooth. It was somewhat thick. It was thick enough not to break, right? Could bend a little bit. Yeah.
And then, you didn't taste it. It wasn't something that you could taste. We can't really use that. I don't think you put it in your mouth, if I remember right. Afterwards, like the Olympics, and they put their medal. It wasn't something that you did. But if you can remember, what was maybe a smell that you had?
It was like that kind of like that new plastic, right? Something new.
Like a new plastic smell. Okay. And what did you, if you can think of it, or even the scenario in which you got it, what did you hear?
I would say like the closest thing I can think of like hearing is like my heart beating really fast from having just run 13 miles. And just like, and I guess it's kind of a feel too, but I just like, kind of like, when you're like exhausted, when you finish something, I'm sure there are people saying congrats. All the only thing I could hear was my body saying like, you're finally done. I don't know when I'm going to stop feeling this way, but I do know that you're done running.
Mm-hmm. So you could hear those voices, you could hear your heartbeat, you could hear that representation, right? So if we tap into those senses, right, our 5 senses is what we went through outside of the sense of taste, it brings back a more vividness to this, other than this medal that was lost, right? Our stuff holds that for us, and it can hold that in a way that maybe a draw from the loved ones that maybe are gone, that maybe we don't feel like we can access that independently without that, whatever that thing is. I think the one thing that was the one thing that was saved, that Xavier saved, was a stuffed animal, our old dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we had custom made. And when we walked out the door, I said something to the effect of, take whatever it is that you need, right? Or that you would miss if we didn't have it. And he took this blanket we made, he took this stuffed dog that is eerily representative of this dog that we had. And those are the 2 things that got saved. For him, because he was younger, obviously it was 4+ years ago. For him, that represented.
All right, hold on. Let me clear that up. He was 4 years ago when the dog passed away, and that's the dog has a meaning in his heart. It was 4 months ago that he walked out the door with it the night before the fire. No, it's okay.
Yes. For him, that represented, and why he decided to take those 2 things is because he said to me in the past is, I don't remember her. I'm those memories without those pictures or the stuffed animal or this blanket, I was kind of too young to remember it so vividly. As time goes on, the vividness is fading. He took those. He was very happy that he took those, right, for that reason, but because it represented something that he wasn't really sure that without it he could access, right?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I know with kids, especially, they typically lean on these things, these transitional objects, right? Like, blankets and stuffies. And, I don't know that everyone was able to bring every blanket and every stuffy, but it's not just kids, right? Like adults have these things too that, they cling to. And maybe if it's something superficial but like functional, it comes with you, right? Like an iPad, right? Like I brought very little things, but all my electronics somehow came with me. And that was one lucky thing. But I think adults have these transitional objects as well. How do adults kind of have some of these things, and then what happens when these things are taken and then wildfire?
Well, I think just like kids, and having or desiring this stuff as a sense of security, or as a memory, as we talk about just why is stuff meaningful. It's a secure base, right? As a child, there's not a lot that we have control of. We listen to our parents, hopefully, and we have to go to school, we have to go to whatever it is, and we take that thing that makes us feel safe with us. We could talk about attachment styles and how that impacts how that is, or how kids may or may not need that. Maybe a conversation for another time, but it goes back to that attachment style. It goes back to our parents are secure base. Our hope is that answer is yes initially. If our parents are that secure base, that transitional object might be something as silly as like a t-shirt of a parent. It's the smell. It taps into those memories, or those 5 senses, because I know what mom smells like. I recognize the shirt. It's familiar. It's something that I can carry with me that makes me feel safe, right? Adults need that too, right? I think that the interesting thing with the fire is we didn't get to choose, really. I mean, brought our electronics. We brought, whatever clothes we were going for the night, thinking we'd be back the next day. We packed pretty minimally, especially for us, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get to choose which transitional objects with intention were coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that transitional object is a little bit different in how it's representing, as I experienced it, as I see it with people that have lost their homes, or even those that have been displaced.
Yeah. So I want to talk about like our identity with our stuff. At the top of this, I talked about our funny little REI incident where I thought we were going to walk in and all of Austin's stuff, all of Austin's camping stuff was going to be on wall, and we'd just pay for it and it'd be the exact same. And then I moped around because I didn't know what to do. And I also think there's a music podcaster who lost her home in Altadena, and she was talking, and she wears like cool vintage clothes, and she wrote some post about every concert ticket she had gone to since she was 13, every piece of vintage clothing, which obviously, and I was just thinking about like that identity, because like for me, yeah, I can go to Vuori or wherever, and I even went on some used clothes places to find many of the old things I wore, but I didn't have as many like once in a lifetime things that like represented me and who I was. So where do when it comes to when we lose these objects, these things that can't be taken from us, obviously, like you said, there's things that are tied to memory, but what about when it's tied to identity? When people get, where it becomes a part of who you are, how is that different among different people?
Yeah, I think that it's your sense of self. At the very baseline, it's your sense of self is, depending on where we are. And again, this, I guess, going back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is at the baseline, we need food, shelter, clothing, right? Our physiological needs to be met. Secondary, we need safety, right? And then we can kind of, go up the hierarchy of needs. But if we don't have maybe those baselines, right, of our food, shelter, clothing, really even being, I mean, in the aftermath, we all kind of felt that, right? And for a brief moment, for a few weeks, for a couple of days, a few months, depending on who you were and how you landed. But those things, or the way in which we attach ourselves to them, is really how much we identify with it without it, right? Can I be confident? Can I be secure without, and again, going back to attachment styles, can I be secure without that thing? Do I know this to be true without that thing? Right. And the incident with, as I was describing with Xavier, is he wasn't sure that he could still access those memories and hold this thing that he really loved if he didn't have this. Right. So that was much more important to him to take, right? Whereas you or I was like, when we probably could have replaced it, right? we knew that. But the other part is we knew this dog. We didn't need to have the stuff, right? We knew it to be true. The memories were secure. It's not something that would be difficult for us to access. When we don't maybe know that, right? If we don't have a sense of our basic needs being met, we hold on to those things, right? If we, I should elaborate, if we have those basic needs are not met, but also maybe if we've experienced trauma, right? Or our sense of identity is not secure, we hold different meanings to that because maybe that's our only way to actually feel like that is true. This object makes it true, right? That I mean, I got my medals because I like the visual, right, of my marathons that I ran. I was able to recoup those, and I don't know that the statement is necessarily true for me, but without my medals, I know I'm a runner. I love running. That's my coping. That's my happy place. I didn't need my medals to know that to be true, right? For somebody else, though, that might be the case for them, right? That might have represented that thing that maybe they want to be, but they don't necessarily feel is true without it, right? That, I mean, you could probably walk into somebody's house and see maybe a whole bunch of books, and that's the thing that represents that piece in themselves that they're not fully feeling internally. Maybe it's their diplomas that are on the wall that they say, I want to make sure everybody knows that these are the degrees that I've got, because if you don't see it on the wall, maybe you're not going to see it within myself, right? We live that out in many different ways with our stuff. And like I said, with a sense of self, with a sense of, sometimes when it comes to trauma, but it goes back to those basic needs, that sense of our physiological needs and our sense of safety.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And because there are so many things that are tied to this, right? Even like with the memories, like our memories with our children, we grew up in the cloud age. Every image and piece of media that I have for them lives in a cloud. And so like I'm not missing anything. But our beloved neighbors next door who lived in their house for 40 years and they have a son. iPhones weren't invented when their son was born. And, according to the last time I saw them, they lost, he said he lost everything. He packed really, really light. And so whether it's that, or, a vintage piece of clothing, there's also a uniqueness and there's an irreplaceableness. I think through this, we found a lot of things that have been replaceable, and I want to talk about what that looks like and how, because that can be complicated too. But there are some things that are absolutely just a straight loss in there. You can't get them back, and I think that's almost different, right? Because at that point you start grieving your stuff. Is that right? I mean, is yeah. So it's really interesting to me to kind of think about all of those things that were specific to different people, including us, that just can't be, recaptured, because I think that is where a lot of that pain comes from. So how can grief be somewhat misunderstood when it comes to like grieving these possessions, whether they're unique or something that we can replace? Like, how does grief for a thing come into, kind of the grief that we've had for the life we thought we were living?
Say that last part again.
Sorry. So obviously all of us have been grieving in one way, shape, or form, right? And much of that grief has been the life that we had was gone. The place that we thought was safe is gone. And then part of that are these unique possessions that we can no longer have. So how do people grieve possessions like differently, and how can that get misunderstood sometimes?
I think that's hard to quantify because everybody does grieve so differently. I mean, I think some people can, I had VRA clothes, I can go to the store, I can get the VRA clothes back, right? That's very transactional. That's something that maybe there wasn't an attachment to as much as I like the clothing brand. I like the clothing itself is something that they keep a certain style. I can replace that fairly easily, or at least you were able to, right? Then there's those irreplaceable things like you're talking. It's probably harder to quantify maybe those things that aren't replaceable or familiar or bring a sense of security or safety, because now it's just gone. And not only is it gone, we didn't choose for it to be gone, right? It's not like we did a spring cleaning and had a garage sale and said, okay, I'm done with this, right? There's a sense that the fire is that somebody in this sense went into our home and took our stuff. It's icky. It doesn't feel good, right? It's, as our lots get cleared, we're starting to feel a little bit that there is a little bit more of that cleanse. Part of that time is helpful, right? It's not as sad up there as we go up there, but it's not linear. Grief isn't linear, right? As we may have these five different stages of grief, but there's no order to them. There's no time in which we expect to stay in them. There's no one we experience more than the other. That's kind of why grief and how we describe these stages are kind of vague, right? And I think as we grieve, where we landed, we had this almost the best case scenario, right? We were close to our lot. I can go run in the same places. You can go work out in your same places. We can go to the stores that we like. We can still experience the parks. Xavier was able to still go to his school. Tyson still have his nanny. A lot of these things were just like we were back home, right? That will help our grieving, right? That's our basic needs that I'm talking about, those physiological needs that can help our grieving, because we don't have to then think about those things. Those familiarities are there, right? That makes us feel good and something that we know and we like. So our mind doesn't have to understand that. So we can grieve a little bit easier knowing that, because we can have that higher level of process, right? We have our emotional side to us. We also have our intellectual prefrontal cortex, which we have higher processes, which is more linear thought, which is, a higher level of thinking in general. When we've gone through this incident, the wildfires, we're living in this emotional primitive brain, right? I think both of us experienced that brain, and you've said, like, my mind was just too full, right?
Yes.
I couldn't. I remember sitting and trying to do work and just sitting at my computer staring at it for hours and literally not getting anything done, right? Our minds were in this primitive emotional state, whether we wanted to admit it or not, right? That's where we were. It's our minds trying to understand it, right? If we can get to that place where we can land in our new space, because we all had to, our grief can start moving in the direction of these 5 stages, right? Again, they're not defined by time or a certain path or how many times we're going to go through them, right? But we can move into that process. We can move into a little bit more of that intellectual prefrontal cortex, higher level of thinking, because we have our secure base restored, right? So when some of those people that maybe haven't experienced that landing in the way that we had may still be in more of that primitive state, right? Meaning their grief is going to be more complex. So if you're not part of the fires, you say, this was awful. I saw it on TV. It wasn't great. But it's 6 months ago. It's almost 6 months ago, right? We should be good. You guys have a new normal. You are figuring things out. Whatever it may be, this rational mind that I know I've done when I've seen other fires on TV, right, or throughout the state, to say it should be okay now. You guys, you got insurance, whatever that may be. If we haven't landed and our basic needs haven't been restored in a certain sense, or even if we're trying to figure that out, we're in a different city, we're different people, we can't access the same things. Again, because it's not by our choice that we decided we landed there. It's going to be harder for us to go through that grieving process. it's going to be harder for us to have that higher level of thinking to even say, I miss that whatever that thing is. So that's a complicated question in that sense, because so much else goes into our ability to grieve.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to talk about replaceable items. If you're listening, I've got quotation marks up, because I remember literally driving down away from the fire, not 100% knowing that the house was gone, but looking up in the mountains and being pretty sure that it was. And I was speaking with my parents, and I told my mom that the oldest thing that I owned was this book that she bought me when I graduated 5th grade. And it's this little book. It was actually written by Michael Jordan, the basketball player. Yeah. And it had this little writing that she wrote for me graduating. And I, years ago, did some LinkedIn post about it, some motivational kind of thing. And so I had a photo of exactly what she wrote. And I asked her to go out and find 2 copies. And I wanted her to write exactly what she wrote in one of them. And then I was going to take the other one. And I did something for Xavier when he graduated 5th grade. And holding that new copy with her handwriting, which thank God has not aged a day since 1994, it almost means more to me now. Right? Like it's a transitional object. I mean, I moved 13 times in 12 years. I can't tell you how many things I lost. I never let that go. And somehow it was replaced. And all the things in the world made that possible for it to be replaced. And now it means more. But I don't think that's necessarily how everyone should feel or will feel about these sort of things. But as somebody I know yourself, you ran those marathons and you got those medals. How do you feel with some of these replacement items that aren't the exact same things as your original stuff, but are a representation of what they were before, or a replacement of what was before?
It's funny. I almost have the opposite feeling around it. I feel a
That's
certain
totally
annoyance.
Cool. Yeah, go for it. I want to hear it. That's awesome.
I think even in the couple medals that I was able to so kindly replace, it wasn't the medal that I actually earned. And that sounds silly. It's the same actually, like the medal from the year from the race I ran, but that's not the one that I actually got. Right. So it's like, oh, that's really great. I'm glad I have that memory. There's clothes that I've rebought that I rebought a dress that I really liked. And it's like, oh, that was really expensive the first time. Now I have to pay for the expensive piece of clothing, but I like it. So I'm going to. That there's been more of that kind of, I guess I could say, an annoyance around it. Of there's certain things that we've definitely replaced in the exact same form, and thankfully we've been able to. But it doesn't hold that sentiment, because for me it was probably more of the actual item than just the stuff, if you will.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is great to have different perspectives, because sometimes when you have different perspectives on, like, it's more like a debate where you're like, oh, who's right on this one? And the answer with this is nobody's right. It's just 2 people who feel different ways and connections to these things. And if you're at home and you think you're supposed to feel one way, we can let you know that you're allowed to feel however the hell you want, and that it's going to be different for everybody, right? And I think we see that a lot, and maybe it even changes along the way, because like right at the beginning, think about how happy we were for places like Shutterfly that would replace everything we had for free. So Anna was really smart a long time ago. She didn't like all the clutter of Xavier's like childhood drawings and art, and so she digitized them all into books. And we had digitized books, so we didn't have his original art laying around everywhere. And we were able to get that that back. And so, and I feel like when we found those companies that were doing that, that felt so great And there was like that feeling of just being so happy that human beings were so good and so willing to give. But now that we're 4 or 5 months later from collecting those things, how do you feel about them now? Have your feelings changed since initially that, oh, we're going to be able to get this back in some form, versus it's not the original?
For that stuff, I do. I think there's definitely some things that these companies that were able to do, you had to verify you owned it in the first place, but once you did, they would send it to you, and they were very kind and very, they showed up in a lot of ways. I think when it comes to the kids, like that artwork, we didn't lose his artwork, right? We were able to get it back and everything, right? Tyson, we can't necessarily say that completely, but he's little, we'll make more. That we'll get there. And I, even in that, I think his caregiver, I made a statement to her, and day one off the bat, she went and got art stuff. They started recreating, right? And so what we kind of found out was we did a lot better at that stuff than I think we realized we did. That a lot of those kind of memories, or even pictures of, like certificates that the kids have earned, or, their when they were at the hospital, taking pictures of like the name and, all that, we have that. Maybe we don't have it tangibly, right? It's not that original. But I think what I've kind of realized, and X has helped me to realize this, is they don't actually care. they don't need that, right? I think as parents think like, oh, they're going to take this one day, they're going to want this, we save all the things, and they don't want it. We didn't want it when we got to that stage, and it's saying, here's your stuff, I saved it all. And as a parent, we expect them to be like, oh, thank God you did this, thank you, Mom, or thank you, Dad. That's not the reality, right? And it wasn't, at least my reality. It was like, where am I going to store this stuff? It was stored under the deck in our house. It was right. And I think that's probably true. And X, even as we went sifting, he kind of represented that to say, Mom, what are we looking for? Right. I'm good. We found some cool stuff. It was kind of like a treasure hunt for him. And that was kind of my moment to realize they don't really care about that. And these things that maybe we put these value in this stuff, maybe it's displaced, right? It's something that we maybe need for us, or we think our kids might need later. We're trying to plan, but we don't actually need, right? And I think as we had, there is, if we can talk about maybe the positive side, or the silver lining of the stuff being gone, is there's a lot of stuff. You don't notice how much stuff you have until you decide to move. And I think there was a piece of that of we wanted to cleanse, and maybe we felt a responsibility of holding on to our own artwork or whatever it may be that our parents handed over, but we didn't actually want, right? Or that didn't hold that same meaning to us as it did our parents. That it's kind of nice not to have so much stuff, in a sense, that we don't need it. It's not, we don't need to just gather it in that sense. And, I think somebody even might have posted early on, trying to bring light to the situation, to say, if we can for a minute live in this space of what the silver lining is, who's happy that this ... house project didn't get done? Everybody weigh in, and everybody's weighing in. I didn't have to repurchase those windows. That landscaping needed to be done, or the roof needed to be repaired, or those house projects that just are ever ending. But that was kind of a moment of reprieve, I think, an exhale for a lot of people, to say, well, if I could think of something that maybe is positive of this, is make procrastination in doing this one thing actually save me a lot of money, right? So there can be both. There can be that duality of, yes, there's a lot of things that are awful about the situation, but if we can see maybe that cleansing part of it, if our grief, where we are at in our grief process, allows that, there's some positive stuff that we can speak on. But I know that has been spoke on too, as we continue with this time and recover.
Yeah, I know a couple weeks back you were talking about how freeing it is to have so much less clothes. I know I definitely had a closet full of things that I was like, I don't know if I'm ever gonna wear this again. But if you were like, "Can we throw this out?" I'm like, "No, that's my shirt. What are you talking about?" And what is you know how does this change all of us moving forward with our connection to stuff? I'm sure it's going to be different for everyone. Does it make you want to hold your stuff tighter and put it in a lockbox somewhere in a bank vault, or does it make you just like not want to have to feel that pain of being disconnected from your stuff again, or like everything? Is it kind of like all of the above?
Probably a little bit of all of the above. There's certain things, I mean, I'll say meaningful things. Like I'm trying to think of something that was made for me, right? That stuff is meaningful, right? Something that maybe
Mhm.
the kids painted, or was just for made specifically, or with intention, right? If it's I think I said on Mother's Day, I said, I don't need anything right now. Don't just get me something because we're supposed to, right? Let's go and do something. Let's go, create a day together. And the stuff we can get is a nice picnic and a beach day and a lunch together, right? I don't want anything, partly because we don't have space right now for that, right? But also we don't need I don't need it, right? We can be in the moment. I don't need to have the thing to represent that moment that we know is, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think about that, especially because as you think about rebuilding, and at some point we'll have nice new homes and we'll want to decorate those. And you think about things that are like one of a kind, unique, and original piece of art. And then, like, I was thinking the other day, because, we 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 had a housewarming party 5 years after we moved in, 5.5 years, actually. And like we decorated and got it like all done, like, and that, and enjoyed it for 6 months. But one of the things I did is I created this little like inspirational poem, like for the boys or whatever, and that's all digitized. Like I have that file, I can reprint that, and like that feels nice. But like as we look forward, and you start kind of you I will say, like, when you think you're going to be building a new home and wasn't something that was ever on your radar, like you have these grand ambitions that it's going to be like it's going to look like it should be an architectural digest. Maybe this is just me. But like, and that it has all these cool, unique things. And like, I wonder if like what you're talking about with the stuff is almost like a reprieve. Like, hey, like let's not think about stuff for a little bit. We don't, like you said, we don't have the space. Maybe we don't have the space emotionally either. Right. Like I could never like invest in something super unique right now that like if we lost it, it would like tear me apart. Like I just don't have time for that right now. But when I think about building a new house, I think about decorating a new house, I think about the uniqueness. I think about wanting something different. I want something that we can touch and is, one of a kind. Am I just, super optimistic that this is never going to happen again? Or is that kind of just part of the process? Is it almost like, my way of grieving losing stuff is thinking about all the next stuff I'm going to accumulate when the time is right? Um, I don't know the answer, but how do you see it?
That next, the new house, you're saying?
Yeah, just like your that relationship with stuff in the next life, right? Because like you said, right now we're reprieving from stuff. We don't have space for stuff. We're doing the minimalist thing, and that's good. But like, what happens when you move in and you want to start decorating? Where do you see stuff coming into
Mhm.
your, let's say, new home life?
Yeah, I think, well, something that I know we started, or a couple things as we traveled, which you always made fun of us a little bit about, was that stuff, right? Xavier always wanted to get a magnet. I got a ornament for our Christmas tree. We may have gotten one souvenir, right? But that I think goes back to the representation of, that memory of whatever that trip is. We can look at that thing our most recent one was when we went to Alaska. We got this wood whale's tail. We looked at that, and it represented that trip to Alaska, that cruise. How fun! That we could access that. And again, not that we had to, we can still access that, but it was a visual reminder when we went to our living room that thing was there. I think we'll probably still want to do that. I know we talked, especially with Xavier, about rebuilding that collection of stuff. That was the one thing that he was probably most sad that he lost, was his magnet collection. But yeah, I think it's what you're talking about is what comes up for me is, we have a house right now. We're living in a house. We have it's furnished. It's great in a lot of ways. And we have to think about a lot of it when we moved in, outside of, getting maybe the boys some beds. It was all here for us, right? But it's a house. It's somewhere where we're kind of staging until our home gets built, right? And that home is then who we are and what we value. So I probably share that with you. Maybe not in that, I don't know that I'm in that 100% that same earnest way, right? I know that we've joked that you're like, initially you were 3 hours ahead of me in the grieving process. Maybe you were then a week, and maybe you're 2 months still now. I'll get there. I'm a little slower at that processing, but I think we share that sentiment about the excitement, especially now that we're not dealing with the immediate aftermath and the crisis mode still. We're getting into more of that exciting mode of, what do we want our house to be, and imagining and playing house in a certain way. Our lot is cleared. We both go out there and just kind of imagine, what's this going to look like? But yeah, I think it's going to be what represents us. We're, knowing that we're not going to stay here. We're not investing in this place in that same way as what we know we're going to want to invest in more of our permanent place, because this isn't ours, right?
Yeah. It's going to be our time capsule. I've talked to some people before who have had, growing up, either had to move out for like a year or something, and they always talk about, like, it was weird, we had to go from this big house to an apartment, but like we had so much fun. There was this nice family that was there, and our boys are able to kind of enjoy some of our new neighbors a lot too, and I know they're loving this time, and obviously everything is a little bit different for them. I want to ask a little bit about just kind of like processing like the loss of stuff when you maybe are different from your partner or some of the other people that you live with. Because when you were bringing up that Alaska example, and for some, like, there's something in my mind that was just like, yeah, but what about all the photos that we have? We have that aura frame, and I see an Alaska photo all the time, and I'm perfectly okay. Like, why would I need to be hurt by the fact that we don't have that whale's tail, even though we went to like 17 different gift shops to actually find the best one, and we did, and now we can't figure out which one it is. Why, for people who obviously agree differently, what, I made a promise to you a long time ago to never be your patient. But what is it about my brain that goes right to trying to justify the things that we do have versus the thing that we lost, where maybe you're just like, I want to be sad about the whale's tail for a minute. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think I'll say in a general sense, we like to plow through those uncomfortable feelings, right? I think we all grieve in different ways. We all, put connection to different things. And I guess I know being able to talk, we don't talk about it, right? And this we talk about, obviously, because it's been so relevant. But when we have a death or a loss, or, even, a loss of a game, we can grieve, even though it's a micro grief, right? We can grieve that. Is, some people, maybe the weight of that isn't the same for each person, right? If we have different attachments to the stuff, right? But also making that space for grief, I think, is important. It's uncomfortable. It's not fun. It's not a space that we want to sit and, and just cry all the time. That's not somewhere where anybody likes to live. I think I make a joke that when I, if I am with a client, we get to a certain point and they're crying, I was like, yes, we got there, right? We broke through, because we have these ego protections that say, that's too vulnerable, that's scary. What if I start crying and don't stop? What if I stop, then all of a sudden it floods. It's there, it's real, right? And we try to escape that. Not to say that we should be crying every moment and every day, but if there's purpose in the grief, right? If we don't, and everyone can experience grief differently, right? I probably sit in it in more of that real way, where you sit in it and creating a podcast and providing information. That would be like my Everest production. But it's still grief, right? That's our way to say, like, how do I do something with this? There's this energy here that I need to expel, right? We can, just because there's more forward thinking maybe in what you're experiencing, it doesn't mean that it's still not grief, right? And sitting in the grief, being able to talk about it, maybe in more of an intellectual space, because it feels safer. It's not as icky. It's not feeling like I'm that Debbie Downer, right? That's more comfortable, but that's our way to work through it. Whereas for me, I want to say that I'm angry, or I did. I'm probably not that space now, but I was angry and I was sad, and I just wanted somebody to live in that space with me for a second, right? I think the most important thing when it comes to that is allowing whatever that uncomfortability is to be. Because if we shut it down, it's going to keep coming up. It's going to show up in different ways. It's going to impact us long term. So making that space, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, I like to joke that I'm not quite allergic to pain, but I'm going to find the ointment pretty darn quick. Try to make it go away. And I think that ends up happening, right? And just different, whether it's personalities or archetypes, like, problem solver, entrepreneur, like that's just what I want to be, and not what I want to be. It's what I naturally am. I always joke with people about I was the world's worst employee the couple times I tried. And, I think the idea behind it is just like, oh my gosh, this stuff happened. Like, how do I replace the stuff? How can I, recreate something? And I probably try and go after that through like the lens of healing, where like somebody might feel more through the lens of like betrayal. Right? How can we betray our old stuff? How can we betray that old whale's tail by getting a new one that was actually made in China and not Alaska? Huh? How could we do that? And my thing would be because, what if it brings a smile on our kid's face? And so I think that stuff just kind of goes a little bit different. But I kind of want to ask one last question here. What advice would you give people who are not on the same wavelength as those loved ones, right? Like, we joked through some of the things we are right here. Our kids, obviously, they were faster than me in their grieving process. And then we were left with you, and we did all do our best. But when you're not on that same wavelength and somebody's still hurting, I mean, 6 months from now, or 6 months later, I know there are people who are still really hurting, and they're probably in households with people who are maybe thinking more of like the next building the next house, doing the next thing. How can you be there for those people who are still in pain, still in mourning, still really missing their stuff?
I think, just making the space for it, right? Is you don't have to be on the same, you can be 2 months ahead of me, right? In the grieving process, you can grieve in a different way. It's not a competition, right? It's not something that I'm trying to catch up with you, or you're trying to slow down for me. It's being able to acknowledge that that's where you're at and this is where I'm at, and both of those are okay. That wherever that is I think just communication being a huge piece. And I think I heard on the other podcast, but I know that we've experienced too, is just there's those moments where I'm like, grieve the freaking shark's tail, right? Take a step. I'm not there. And you're like, well, come on, let's go. We got to make decisions. We have 10 million of them. Help me make one. Right. And we had those moments to say, oh crap, we're not in the same spot. But realizing that and accepting and knowing that that's okay, I think is important. That's, you know, you don't have to be in this space, or I don't have to be in this space, but it's, like I said, grief not being linear, the stages not being in a certain order or time frame, and, you know, communicating that, oh, I might really experience grief about this, or I am experiencing a lot of grief around this, or you being very excited about another thing. Is just like allowing that person to be wherever they're at, right? Not having to solve it, right? Maybe the solve isn't what we're asking, but maybe just sitting, even if we don't like it, sitting in there with it for a minute, or even, you know, in my situation of maybe not being in that space to make decisions, but also knowing that that's something that you need, right? And supporting one another and wherever their grief is. But knowing it's not a competition, knowing that both of us can experience it differently and may continue to experience it differently, but communicating throughout that whole, what that is, and putting words to what that is. Because I think as partners, as family members, we often try to mind read, right? We expect people to mind read. What that does is just get us all in trouble, right? So vocalizing where you're at, continuing to have check-ins with your partner, I think is really key.
And then I know there's been some great resources out there. I don't know if you have any that you can share for some people who, you know, are still struggling. And there's been, I know right after the fires, there was Google Sheets of all sorts of support groups and whatnot. And to one of the points you made earlier, now that we're 6 months later, not everyone's like paying as much attention, you know. So if people are still feeling this way and they just need a little extra help, where can they go to hopefully find some of that support if they're ready to take that leap?
Yeah, I know at least in this area, I'm trying to think, at least 3 to 5 weekly grief groups specific to Altadena survivors. If you want to go in virtual or in person, we can, I don't know if you can link it, but we can probably link them to the places that are offering that. There's also a sheet where I know I have access to, that therapists that are trained. There's a grief center in the area that does specific grief counseling, but also just Psychology Today, right? That's a good, easy place to go to find therapists that take insurance, therapists that don't, those that are in person, those are that telehealth. If you want to specialize in grief, you can kind of filter that out. Obviously, you can go through your insurance if that's something that you're interested in, but those would be the things that I could think of off the top of my head that are available.
And
we'll
put.
Oh, go.
I was going to say, we can definitely put everything in the show notes too. So we'll follow up with some of those resources. You can find that, you know, wherever you're listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the other thing that I was just going to say is finding a community wherever it is that, you know, maybe it's your old community, maybe it's a new community, but finding a sense of community. I know we jumped on that pretty quick, and part of why I did with our neighborhood, we kind of had a cheat sheet of who was in our neighborhood and, you know, numbers, emails, whatnot. We got everybody connected again, but that was for the purpose, at least for my stance, was a purpose of community, to kind of continue to say, you know, every house in our neighborhood was gone. So we're all in the very, very same boat. There wasn't anything that was surviving. But that has been something that we continue once a month, that there's a lot of on-said things within that monthly meetup that we all just get in a different sense. We don't have to explain. We're all kind of going through this together. You know, there's a certain trauma bonding, obviously, that has happened with that, but it also represents a sense of community, that we had at a baseline before, but really are developing and with a goal. And I think the hope, as most of us are rebuilding, that when we get back there, it's going to be pretty amazing, right? Because we all know each other. Our kids are playing now and developing relationships, and we know where each person's going to be and where they're at. And it's such a sense of connection that we have. So outside of maybe the therapy realm is finding whatever that community is for you.
Mm-hmm. I really love what you said, and I completely agree about how amazing it's going to be once we all get back. And that is where we're going to end it today. Anna, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.